So this will be available.
Hello, everyone. Today I have a very popular author, Tuhin Sinha and Ambalika, on Author's Corner for Writersmelon. Hello, everyone. And um, the book today that we are going to discuss is a very special one. I mean, I loved reading it, and it kind of opened my eyes to so many unknown facts, so many unsung heroes of India. And the book is called The Great Tribal Warriors of Bharat. And I would, without wasting any more time, I would really like Tuhin to start and tell us what was your inspiration to start this work of research and writing about the tribals. I also see that your previous book is also about a tribal leader. So please, tell us more about your work that you're trying to do here.
Hi, everybody. I think it's the start of the festive season, so very happy Navratri to all of you. I think for a change, let's reverse this. What drew you to the book? Because sitting in Germany, there must have been something that excited you. Whether it was the cover.
Okay, I'm a books person, Tuhin. I'm a book hunter, so I just look for books all around. I mean, my Kindle is full of downloaded samples, half-read books, full-read books, reread books. So for me, I am a voracious reader, and I just and especially anything that has got to recent Indian history is very interesting for me. And where I live doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, Dil hai Hindustani, right?
Brilliant. So if you followed my journey, I've had this knack of wanting to, kind of launch myself every 3 or 4 years with different genres. And that's a pattern which I have followed. So I think after my previous book, there was a long sabbatical in between from 2018 onwards. I was involved in a still am involved in a parallel political career and a lot of other things. So I think I was at that stage of my career where I needed to figure out what is that next big idea that one could work on. And ideally, that narrative had to complement the larger socio-political narrative, because most of my writings that way are in sync, or they kind of expand or contradict the existing socio-political narrative. That just, I believe, gives your book a larger essence, because at the end of the day, what an evolved individual character does in a story, if he is socio-politically active, is inspired in some way or the other by the incidents around him.
Okay.
For example, we're based in Germany. There is a lot of talk of recession and Europe being the worst impacted. So I'm sure, in your conversations with your acquaintances, that would figure somewhere prominently. And so my idea has always been to kind of weave that socio-political narrative in my writings. And in the last 8 years or so, there has been a conscious attempt in India to kind of own up to our history, to kind of look beyond those privileged individuals who were celebrated in our history books. And I think, when you talk about the tribal warriors, that's a parallel freedom movement that predates the existing or the mainstream freedom movement, which unfortunately has not been documented enough. So, in the run up to the 75 years to 75th year of independence, there were certain ideas which I was thinking of. And again, as a writer, and also for my readers, it helps to give you a larger arc. So I kind of embarked upon this trilogy, which would celebrate our tribal subaltern heroes. Birsa Munda was the first of the series, followed by the great tribal warriors of Bharat. And I have to confess that, unfortunately, without the research and without the hard work of Amballika, this would not have seen the light of the day. Because I think, there is so much that you can do at the pace at which I have tried to do. So it helps to kind of expand, collaborate, and, get into a win-win situation. So The Great Tribal Warriors is the second of that trilogy, and a third one will be out somewhere in the middle of next year. And I think this is a journey to celebrate those heroes of our freedom movement who have never got their due, because much before the mainstream freedom movement, which has been documented, that is largely post 1857, there has existed a parallel freedom movement which predates way back to 1760s. And in many ways, that parallel movement, which starting from 19th century, early 19th century, was kind of happening sporadically and simultaneously almost in all parts of the country, that, in my opinion, and I think that also kind of is corroborated with our research, complemented the mainstream freedom movement. So I think 1857 had a huge run up to it. And also post 1857, there is a lot which happened in the Indian freedom struggle, or the Indian, when it comes to our freedom movement, which was not talked about. So this book is an attempt to honor many of those unspoken heroes, starting with Tilka Maji is the first character, and it goes up to Rani Gadinyu, who was, there are people who were in the early stages of pre-1857, and then there were people who were closer to freedom movement. So it covers 17 and all. 4 of them are
17
women.
leaders, 17 tribal leaders.
I mean, you can call them warriors, but
Warriors.
like warriors warriors would not just mean fighting with swords or fighting the guerrilla warfare.
Revolutionaries. Okay.
It started with guerrilla warfare, but then towards the end, the same tribal warriors would deliver some outstanding speeches in our parliament.
Correct.
A couple of them were, strictly adhered to Gandhian beliefs. So when we use the word warrior, they were essentially key actors in our freedom movement. And that's how I would put it.
Right. When I was reading the book, it was quite surprising for me to know that actually what we know about the start of Indian freedom movement was 1957 with Mangal Pandey and all. But the tribal uproar or the tribal revolt actually started much before that, where and we barely read about them in our history books. And in fact, I was doing a bit of more research, and I got to know that there are like several states in India which have like a considerable amount of tribal population even today. So while we now trying to understand a lot about history, what is your perspective about the current situation in India? Because we are talking like 75 years post independence, but still we know that there are oppressed, there is unrest, there is an issue of inequality. And what is your perspective? How do you see the current situation?
Many of these unrests were manufactured.
Okay.
And obviously there is an industry which flourishes on conflict. I mean, we may be in denial, but then there is an industry which flourishes on creating conflicts in society. But anyway, if you look at the last few years, many of these gaps or many of these disparities have been kind of done away with. They've been done away with better deliverance mechanism. When you have, in fact, the sad part of the whole narrative is that till about 8 years ago, some 30 crore people did not have bank accounts. 18,000 villages did not have electricity. 10 crore homes did not have water connection. So when you provide all of these in a very sustained manner, and when with a lot of determination you make that happen, the changes are visible even for the villagers.
Correct.
I think a large number of them, and this is documented with the reports available with the Intelligence Bureau. I think a large part of them, whoever were involved with Naxal activities, now realize that somewhere that was a folly. They were misled by people they were misled by certain agendas. So I think if you're looking at the violence created or violence manufactured using disparity as an alibi, that anyway has come down drastically in the last few years, and that has resulted because of the the changes which
reforms.
people have seen firsthand. I mean, from a sanitation cover of less than 40% of the country has nearly 100% sanitation cover in the last few years, the difference is visible. And the tribal areas are the ones which are experiencing this change firsthand, because they were the ones, obviously, who were completely left out of the transformation, which other parts of the country or other sections of society had benefited from, except for them. So I think that
Absolutely.
difference has been bridged.
And I am
And
often I'm like
And
so
just,
happy. Yes,
I'll
please.
just take 30 seconds to complete.
Sure, sure, sure. Sorry, I
An
thought you're done.
important part of bridging that gap or that disparity is also the cultural narrative, where we are trying to contribute through these books, because
Okay.
many of the descendants of these tribal warriors, are not aware of the contribution of
Rich
their
history.
ancestry,
Mm.
or they're not aware of the contribution, or they're not aware of the glory of their ancestry. So I think if this book creates a certain awakening, if it makes certain people, certain sections of society aware of the contribution of their ancestry in nation building or towards the nation, in any way, that's going to give them a sense of belonging, which a few years ago was not there.
Absolutely. No, it really gives, what I was just trying to say is that it really gives me a lot of hope about the country when I hear, uh, you know, uh, thinkers and doers like you talking about the positive changes, and it is often these positive changes are not really communicated that well across. So sometimes it gives me a lot of hope speaking to people like you who
Thank you
have
so
that
much.
vision in mind. And yes, so the next question would be to Ambalika, because I'm sure I have seen very less books, like very less collaborative books of this kind. And tell me, how did you guys work on this book together? What kind of research did you do, and how was your experience working with Tuhin?
Well, we'll go in the reverse order. It's always a learning experience to work with a senior author, and somebody who is as dynamic as Tuhin really, widens the scope of learning. So when he put forward this idea, I was like, okay, it's a no-brainer. He was like, no, but ye tribal history hai. I was like, no, meko chalega. So for me, it's not about whose history it is, so long as it's history.
Okay.
So that's how we got started. So he had a framework in mind. He said it was really well thought of from his side, and that gave a good starting point for me, because while I love poking around on historical stuff, I am more like a free bird. I don't always take a very
A
well planned
structured
structure to
approach.
it.
Okay.
Yeah. So once I get this and that, then I love putting together pieces of a puzzle. So for me, research is also, I have that same approach even towards research. But he came up with a structure. He said, ye chahiye, chahiye. So obviously the rebel in me was like, no, ye to aise nahi hoega. So, but he was very, very kind and pretty large-hearted, I should say that. He said, chalo, theek hai. So but it is definitely a challenge. You're right, it's
Mm.
definitely a challenge, because both of us have a different writing style. Our approach towards how a story should be crafted is also different, because majorly we have worked on different genres. Since you've worked with both of us in our promotions, so
Yes.
of our previous books, so you would have a fair idea as to how we both write. So the challenge was actually over there, so that when we are writing it, it should not look like acha ye isne likha hai, wo usne likha hai. So it should just be
True.
like, it should give a seamless reading experience to whoever
I mean,
is
is it
reading it.
possible? Because as
And
authors, you will have different voices, right? Like Tuhin will have a different voice, you'll have
yes,
a different voice.
yeah, that's where both of us had lots of long conversations. So he was like, essay karo. So that's also the scope of finding out new ways of
Yeah.
working. So like when I write, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, I prefer more to visualize the characters and their interactions. I like to feel it happening within me and then write it down. Now, working with him, I learned something new. So because he comes from a lot of a variety in writing, so he gave hints, and so I had the option of doing a trial and error. Ye try karke dekhe, wo technique try karke dekhe. And then the first story we started with Tirot Singh, not with Tilka Machi. I started with the Singh, and then I said, okay, let's work on this. Let's see how it goes. We'll refine this. We'll get this right, and then things will pick up pace.
Right.
So it took us time. That's true. It really took us time. And at one point when we started, it was like, "Ye hoega bhi ki nahi?" Because I was taking a lot of time to, make
Put
it
things
sure
together.
that yeah. Because research is sometimes a bit incomplete also.
Yeah.
And I had this habit of freaking out when not finding research materials to my liking. So because it meant I have to now take some creative license to fill in that gap, especially when it comes to Tilka Maji. I mean, like in 1765, I'm sure you would have finished that first chapter.
Yes.
So you would have realized that there's not much of a written record available for Tilka Maji. So now,
Exactly.
and whatever we do have available, it's contestable. We don't know whether it's authentic or not. So if I have to discuss it, even if I have to discuss something with my co-author on that, I have to go with something substantial.
Absolutely.
I can't say yahan pe aise dal denge, waise dal denge. I can't go
Absolutely.
and talk in the air about that. So yes, those kinds of brainstormings took up time in the earlier part. But luckily enough, by the time the pandemic hit onto the second wave, we were also riding pretty high, but in a very creative manner. So by May, June, we had figured out what works and what doesn't work. And thereafter, it was just a matter of finding time and the research and just putting it together. So that's how it was. And when it comes to finding sources for putting things together, that was seriously exciting, because that's again where you get the option of using something like a design thinking, because aapko aise nahi milne wala. I can always say, yeah, I'll go to the museum and I will research, I'll look around things, which I wanted to do seriously. But it's hard. It was doubly hard because it was pandemic and there was no scope for travel either.
Absolutely.
So
Amballika, you also mentioned in between that there were facts which was contestable, and I also heard this quote that history is always written by people in power, right? So so how did you guys handle these kind of confusion where you didn't know what was what is the truth, as in, because sometimes it is also kind of deceptive. So did you guys really face such issues in these individual warriors' lives where you had to debate, contest? I don't know.
Yeah, I remember when we before even I started with Tilka Maji, like even before the draft was prepared, one fine evening I received this tweet I was tagged on a tweet by Tuhin, where somebody had tagged Tuhin saying that, oh, Tilka Maji and this and that, Captain Jabra Pahadia and this and that. So they were like, what I noticed was this is a mishmash of a lot of facts. But the person was like so happily, trumpeting it out as if he found a big gem of a thing. So momentarily I was like, did I get it wrong? Because since a week prior to that, I had been just figuring this out, because incidentally, I also had come across that same source and I had been reading and something didn't strike me as right. So it was pretty fascinating for me to go and look up each and every of those things. And that literally meant having to dig up memoirs and official correspondence between the East India Company officers and their dispatches. And even missionaries who were interacting and writing letters to each other, unke footnotes mein se dhoond ke nikalna hai, aur phir, you have to figure out that thing. So then it struck me that, okay, because there is a paucity of information, there's a gap. So logo ko jo aasan laga, usko fit bitha diya. So that's how they did it. And now we are getting tagged onto it. So I replied to it. And then it's like, okay, so then fine. Then that's when I realized how much more serious one needs to be when researching these things. Because kal ko koi bhi, like, you
can
are
question
interested.
it.
Yeah. So you're coming through it. But when we are actually publishing something, then it's almost like people look up to us that, okay, you might have done something which is more authentic and verifiable and validable, worthy of validation, sorry. So we trust you. But then if we come up with something which is equally wishy-washy, then it's not fair. It's not fair at multiple levels. So yes, we did come across these sort of things. And finally, we came down to one thing. We said, acha, for one particular thing, if we find it's contested, we'll look for 3 to 4 sources.
Cross
3 to 4
verifications.
sources. Yeah. So if 3 to 4 sources are saying the same thing, then 9 out of 10 we'll go with that. But if we
Yeah.
find even one source which is different, we will investigate that. We'll try to see if there are 3 to 4 sources which support that, and they need not directly support it. Ho sakta hai we have to do an inferential uh, inferential जो कहते हैं ना, it's
Conclusion.
equivalent of
Yeah.
conclusion, yeah, like circumstantial evidence के तौर पे उसको treat करके we'll have to infer it. So if even if that is possible, we will do it, but we don't want to give something which is really well known to everyone. We just want to dish out the same stuff. No. Second, just for the sake of getting something new, we don't want to really put in false information or something which really
Play
comes
with
up
the
as
facts. Yes.
playing with
So
facts.
so the book that it is no way like an adaptation or anything from the real hardcore facts, right? It is exactly the true story. It's almost like a biography of these
Right.
warriors, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So biography in the sense, they have not been written as biography previously, but thanks to so much of research that we have now, and also access to online archives which are now made public, we can build a sketch which gives us a very human picture of who these warriors might have been like. So yeah, in that sense, it's a biography. That was always the intention.
Right. Tuhin, who would be your most inspirational warrior amongst all the people that you have written, and who do you think like people have absolutely no clue about? Even like, for example, Birsa Munda and Tilka Maji, maybe people would have heard, but who would be like that really unsung hero who nobody would have heard and is like really remarkable or inspirational according to you?
See, all of them are, all of them serve a purpose, and all of them are exceptional in their own ways. For example, there's a lady by the name of Helen Lecture. Her biggest contribution was that she kind of provided refuge to Subhash Chandra Bose when he was hiding or when he was in. But I think that one contribution would probably, that was very pivotal in Subhash Chandra Bose's next 4 or 5 years after 1939.
Okay.
So, I think the contribution of each one of them, the nature of revolution changes early on when it all began around the later part of the 18th century. It was a guerrilla warfare. Again, the nature of British rule in the tribal areas would be very different from those, let's suppose, in the heart of Delhi or Patna, Kolkata in those days. Because the Britishers would invariably outsource it to two sources. They outsource their rule to two sources. One was the zamindars, who would act as proxies for the Britishers, and every time the Britishers would kind of employ more pressure on the zamindars for additional revenues, the end result would be greater suffering from the tribals, because they would unleash the greater atrocities upon the tribals. But from 1850s onwards, there was a third angle to it, which was a very conscious introduction of missionaries by the Britishers, and the role of cultural subjugation, where there was a concerted attempt to convert
them. Yes.
Yeah. So, British rule invariably in the tribal areas would be outsourced to two of these enemies, the zamindars on the one hand and the missionaries on the other hand. That made it far more complex than the other. So I think it would be very difficult for me to pick any one of them. But yes, I mean, Tilka Maji, in fact, it began even before Tilka Maji. Raghunath Mahato was the first known tribal freedom fighter. But then, it was so tough to dig out relevant or authentic information about these people that we didn't want his chapter to have just a couple of paragraphs and just his mention. We had to let go of him.
Okay.
But the whole revolution of 1855, which is known as the Santhal insurrection, which was engineered by the Santhal brothers of Siddhu Kano along with their family members. Birsa Munda's revolution, which unfortunately is not a part of this book because there's a separate
complete
book on that.
Itself. Yes.
Lari Raju in the south, who was not a tribal, who belonged to a Kshatriya family, but then who took up the cause of tribals all around him. I think all of these are very
inspiring.
very real stories. And just to add to what Amballika was saying at the, about the authenticity bit.
Yes.
See, at one point of time, we had to take this call that we are not trained historians.
Correct.
We are curating a certain narrative. So the book is a ready reckoner for anybody. For a student of history, I would still advise you to, to use our
dig
book
deeper.
as an entry point, that acquaints you about this world. But for a student of history who's pursuing history as a career, I think you need to refer to other books. That's a clarity we have.
Absolutely.
But once we had that clarity, I think we have taken as much care as possible to curate a product which is authentic in its details. But yes, having said that, even now, I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of chapters, somebody can have an objection to it, because like I said, I think authentic sources and corroborated sources of information are very few when it comes to these tribal stories, especially those who were active pre-1850.
Yes, because it would be very difficult to have a lot of written history before the 1990s, right?
So the purpose of this book, therefore, is to, kind of get people to think, yes, this world existed, use it as an entry point into the world. It should whet up their interest. But yes, I think that should be a leading point for them to kind of, delve deeper into the subject, for which I think they would require another level of research if they are into history.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in the recent times, the kind of books that Indian authors have come up with, especially talking about Indian history, has been like really fascinating. And thank you so much for introducing us to this whole new world that we never thought of. When it comes to recent Indian history, we talk about the independence, we talk about partition. At the max, we talk about the 1957 revolution, but this whole parallel world has like opened up once I read your book, and really thank you so much for coming here and talking to us about it. And I wish you all the best. And I don't know, Tuhin, if you're going to write more romantic, offbeat romantic books, but I'm sure you're enjoying writing these gems of historical characters and these stories in your new avatar, like you said in the very beginning, right?
Well, one doesn't know what life has in store, so you never do anything. But which of the offbeat romantic novels have you read? I mean, I've read it.
I haven't read so much of romantic novels in the recent time, but I just saw the books that you have. So yeah, wish you all the best. Wish you two all the best, and thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure being on your show. Thank you. Thank you, Bharat.
Thank you, Tuhin. Thank you, Amballika. Bye-bye.